All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to DAO Talk Weekly. This is DAO Talk Weekly, your one-stop shop for everything DAOs. I'm Tommy.
And I'm Frisson.
Frisson, live from the streets of New York for episode 45. I think I said 43 before we started. This is episode 45. Frisson, how are you? How is New York? How are the people? Shaking hands, kissing babies, getting votes. How's New York?
It's good, man. I'm a little out of my element, you know? I like to keep it very local in Utah and go outside a lot. But this is a little different vibe for me. But last time I was in New York, I was in the Lower East Side in Soho, and that's really overwhelming. This time I'm just in Brooklyn the whole time pretty much, and that's way more my speed. I actually like Brooklyn a lot. And there's so many crypto people here. I'd be setting up in-person meetings, but also just seeing people on the street that I know and saying hi. So it's cool to kind of be in the center of things. And just been working a lot in person with Dennison and Raph, Tally's co-founders, and it's been very productive.
Yeah, there's something about that New York energy. We were talking about it with Steph on the most recent DAO Talk interview. I couldn't live in New York, and I think you kind of mentioned you prefer to be in the Utah, the more local, nature-y setting. Same as me, North Carolina, not the same as Utah, but similar. Just quieter than New York, but it is fun to visit. I love visiting New York, but it's a lot. It's a lot to do in such a short time frame, and I understand why people are addicted to being there. But yeah, I'm jealous. When do you leave? Are you going to be there for another week, or is it today or tomorrow your last day?
No, I'm leaving today.
Leaving today.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah. I'm gonna go from downtown Brooklyn to JFK during rush hour this afternoon, so that should be fun. Yeah, I should take a helicopter. In the airport, they were advertising helicopter rides to Manhattan starting at $125. I was like, okay, what does starting at mean here?
That's not horrible.
Yeah,
but what does starting at mean?
Yeah, but if it was cheap, I probably would do it. Although I'm scared of helicopters.
Dude, helis are...
It's probably... Yeah. It's probably...
Have you been on one?
I have not.
Yeah, I've been in a couple, and I've never felt good in them. It's fun, yeah. But it's oh yeah, this is this is a little sketchy.
Statistically, it's probably fine to do a couple times, right? Just with stuff like that, when you start doing it a lot, the risk profile gets weird. So I should probably do it.
Last week was it 2 weeks ago? We talked about feet. This week we talk about helicopters. But you're not here for that. Let's jump right into this week in DAOs. We're going to start off with some product, not announcements, some, let me restart that. All right, let's jump into what's happening this week in DAOs. Arbitrum's proposals have passed. They reached quorum. They passed. They are pending execution right now. AIP 1.1 and AIP 1.2 are pending execution on chain. Go check those out on Tally. If you want to go check those out, we'll have those in the show notes. If you're watching, you'll notice there's AIP2, another on-chain proposal for the Arbitrum DAO. AIP2 activates support for account abstraction endpoint on One and Nova, which are Arbitrum sidechains, correct, Frisson? What is happening in AIP2? Why should people care about it?
I think AIP 1.1 and 1.2 just established the foundation of the Arbitrum DAO. It's kind of an agreement between all parties about how the DAO works, which is important because the first attempt at that failed spectacularly, which people probably remember from Twitter. So I would say the DAO is officially operating, right? The Constitution is established. We successfully passed a couple proposals. So I think... yeah, more to come. In fact, there's already another on-chain proposal live, so should see things accelerate from here.
For people who want to, be a little more involved in the Arbitrum ecosystem, not just listen to us talk about it briefly every time there's a new on-chain proposal on DAO Talk. I know, this week you mentioned to me, there's an on-chain proposal coming. Is there is that an inside delegate thing? Is that how do people plug into the pre-proposal discussion around Arbitrum DAO if they even can?
Yeah, it's a great time to get involved in Arbitrum because things are not things are kind of still forming. So there's opportunity there. I would say the main hub of the DAO socially is the forum. So you can go there and see what's happening, jump in. There's also a community call every other week. It's at like 1400 UTC. I think I'm doing the math right there. On Tuesdays, every other week, there's a governance calendar you can sign up for. And there's a thread about the community call also in the Arbitrum forums. So you can jump on that way if you want to more just like hear some live discussions and speak up. But yeah, I think if you check out the forums, you'll see there's going to be more stuff. There's going to be some grants program proposals that go live fairly soon. So yeah, lots going on, lots to get involved in.
Yeah, I'd say like if you are just a casual listener or casual DAO observer and you are like, I want to do more, like just pick a DAO and get involved in it. Frission's a great example of someone like maybe you say he maybe had more reach than you, but he only has about 1,000 followers. That's not a shot at you, Frisson. Don't say, you called me up for only 1,000 followers. But like, if you want to get involved in something, you just simply go to forums and start interacting and getting involved. It's a lot easier than I think people expect, but that initial step is hard. So I would just encourage you now, like, if you're interested in DAOs, which you probably are if you're listening to me talk right now on a podcast about DAOs, pick one and go get involved in it. Either just comment on forums if you don't want to, like, you don't have anything to post, get involved, see how the DAO works, and then you might find yourself being a whale like Frisson in the Arbitrum DAO, but in your DAO specifically. You can do Arbitrum as well, but there's a lot of other ones launching. Speaking of, I don't know if it's a DAO itself, but Frax Finance is releasing, they're about to publish a documentation for their new fully on-chain governance system, and they want feedback from the community. Frisson, I feel like we're seeing more and more large protocols start to release documentation or thoughts around on-chain governance, meaningful on-chain governance, and actually caring about it. Whether that's an effect of DAO Talk, I don't know. But that's something we've been talking about since the beginning, is like actually meaningfully decentralizing and having on-chain governance and on-chain infrastructure. I guess two questions. Why should people care about Frax Finance releasing this on-chain governance documentation? I feel like I already know the answer and their listeners know the answer. And do you foresee a lot more protocols going down this road?
Yeah, for sure. So Frax Finance, they're like DeFi has definitely taken a beating, over the last year or two. But there's still some great teams like shipping products. And Frax Finance is one of them. So they've been, continued to ship aggressively throughout the bear in terms of like DeFi products and protocols. But they've also been improving the governance side of things as well. So something we talk about a lot is, to really, scale as a protocol, you really need to strive for credible neutrality, right? If you want to attract, the broadest possible set of users and LPs and participants on your crypto infrastructure, having the ability for people to participate in governance, audit changes to your protocol, uses of treasury funds, the opportunity to kind of participate or at least audit that process is essential. And that's why you see all of the leading protocols in the ecosystem, operating via on-chain governance. If you go through each category, you see it like Arbitrum and Optimism in the rollup space, Uniswap in the AMM exchange space, Aave in the borrow lend space, ENS in the identity space, right? Like the leaders, Gitcoin and Public Goods, they all operate via on-chain governance. And so, so I think you're going to continue to see this, like every, fast growing, promising protocol and team will eventually move in this direction. And so we're super excited to see Frax Finance take this step, and excited to support their team on this journey.
Yeah, I think we agree on this, but like, it's no way to like put a value on this, but the general vibes of like the on-chain meme or the on-chain movement feels very much like it's kind of coming up the bell curve or coming up the growth curve. Would you agree or disagree? Like, I feel like we're kind of starting to see a meaningful shift upwards. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I think so. And I think you're seeing, big players in the ecosystem really lean into on-chain, right? The Arbitrum DAO is a great example. Coinbase is a great example with Base, their roll-up that they're building on the OP stack. Like Zora has gotten a lot of traction with more of like an on-chain approach to NFTs and digital art and collectibles. And so, and Tally is grown a lot in the bear market as well. So I think, you are seeing the best teams in the space kind of lean into the on-chain side of things. I think we saw a lot of the weaknesses of off-chain activities, right? During the bull market. So, it's my personal belief that on-chain is basically what makes crypto useful and special. And so, I think that, ultimately, like I'm kind of a maxi in this respect, in that I think, for example, the biggest market in crypto today is exchange. And if you look at volumes, Binance is like the biggest business in crypto, right? It's the biggest exchange in the biggest category. And Binance is off-chain, right? It's if you think about what Binance really is, it's more of like a side chain, right? Where like people are effectively bridging funds into Binance, and then Binance is like maintaining their own ledger of everything, right? That isn't transparent to the user and doesn't have any of the cryptographic guarantees that make something like Ethereum special. And I believe that like basically all of that volume is going to move on chain. Like I literally think that like spot volume is going to be dominated by Uniswap or maybe a competitive AMM protocol. And I think that some version of like perps and derivatives or will ultimately live on chain as well. That area is like still being unlocked, both from a scaling perspective and a regulatory perspective. Like we're gonna have to, figure out how to operate both of those well. But I believe that like everything will be on chain, including the largest businesses and parts of the crypto world today, which currently live off chain. So I think we're only at the beginning of this.
Yeah, definitely at the beginning. But I think it's a tangible shift from, say, like we're episode 45, like even 20 episodes ago, like half a year ago, 7 months ago, where we were kind of in that stage, like you mentioned, where like all of the off-chain controversies and rugs and scams were happening. Or now we're starting to see that shift of like shaking that out and then seeing the results of that. Like there's still a lot to do and a lot to unlock, but the writing's on the wall, and I think people are starting to read the writing on the wall, which is cool to see. I'd love to see someone write like a meta-analysis of like the on-chain movement. I'm guessing Jesse Pollack will do that at some point, if anyone's going to do it. But
yeah, I think we are in a position to do that as well. So one of the things that Raph and Dennison and I have been speaking about this week is just like the vision for Tally, right? What does the future look like for Tally? What does success look like? And I think, this kind of future where like there's just a exponentially increasing amount of activity and transactions and volume and total value locked in assets on chain is a really exciting future for Tally, because we can ultimately power the like governance and security and decentralization of that activity and those assets. And so we're kind of like intimately tied in to that future. And we have the opportunity to, ride that wave, but also make sure that that wave is successful or contribute to that wave being successful by making it more decentralized and secure and efficiently governed. And so I kind of think this is a story we should tell also at Tally, this future of on-chain and what it looks like and how we're helping.
I agree. Even as I was saying, I was like, yeah, this seems like something I think the Tally team could like co-author a piece around it, especially having the data on the back end as well. So, but right on that note, Tally newsletter number 103, which is pretty wild that we just had that conversation that plugs right in. She's always same brain, content teams on the same brain, but a thread from her on the Tally newsletter. If you want to go read the thread instead of the newsletter, which I don't understand why you would, because they're both about the same length, pretty consumable. We make the Tally newsletter as consumable as possible. But this week was on the decentralization dilemma. By definition, DAO should operate in a completely decentralized way, right? Well, no matter how much we champion decentralization, it's a bit more complicated than that. We're talking the paradox of centralized leadership teams and DAOs in this week's Tally newsletter. And she breaks down some of the larger DAOs, particularly like ApeCoin, and how there is always going to be some level of centralization in DAOs. I think we've talked about this pretty often across the last 45 episodes, about a year we've been doing this podcast of like decentralization, maximalization, and how like pure decentralization might be impossible, and how there's a little bit of centralization in every DAO, and how do we walk that fine line, not only from like a operator's perspective, but from a community perspective, calling it out, demanding better decentralization practices and on-chain rails. Frisson, any thoughts on the decentralization dilemma? You just talked about it a little bit the past like 5 or 10 minutes, but any thoughts on like future moving forward?
Yeah, as someone who's kind of like really involved in trying to operationalize the Arbitrum DAO, like this is very, very real. It's so one concept that a lot of people in crypto have read about or talked about is this concept of structurelessness, and how when there's a lack of structure, it seems good in the sense that it's more decentralized, but it's actually bad because it basically creates a power vacuum that then, actors who are not as well aligned with the long-term benefit of the organization can take advantage of. I think it's called the tyranny of structurelessness, I think is a like relatively like famous concept. And like, I think it might be an academic article that people reference. And this is very true, but it's tricky because, as soon as someone starts to lean in and organize things and, create programs that distribute funds, this potential for centralization emerges, right? And so it's really about striking a balance, and it's about trying to take advantage of the unique features that Ethereum and the blockchain provide, smart contracts provide, to allow the DAO to ultimately maintain control of any centralization that emerges. So as an example of this, the Arbitrum DAO is trying to figure out how to get grants funding going, grants programs. And one thing we're doing at Tally is working closely with a couple of folks who are going to propose grants programs to set it up so the DAO still has ultimate admin control of the grants funds, even though the grants funds will be moved from the DAO to a Gnosis Safe multisig. There's a feature or a module of Safe that the Gnosis Guild team built that called the Zodiac Governor module that allows the DAO to have like admin control over Safe. So it's like, this is not something that can be quote unquote solved, the tension between centralization and decentralization. You can only like innovate to expand the trade-off frontier. There's still a trade-off, but you can push it. You can expand out the utility of like the surface area of the frontier by, having product innovation that allows like more decentralization with more efficiency, even though there's still a trade-off there.
moving on to a couple thought takes. We haven't done a thought boy section in a minute, but we got a piece from Chase Chapman. We might see DAOs move away from working groups with a single governance token and towards domain-specific governance layers with multiple specialized tokens. Frisson, I don't know if you've seen this, so maybe we'll just get your initial take on this, but it kind of goes similar to what we just talked about, how, this is maybe one way moving away from centralization with just one single governance token, and then having, multiple sub-DAOs. It almost feels like kind of like a sub-DAO take, but more of like this is what the infrastructure will look like for a sub-DAO within a DAO. Thoughts on this?
The underlying premise of, that Chase is discussing here, which is like, every token holder doesn't need to vote on every decision. There's sort of like, it's like division of labor, and the efficiencies that come from that are extremely important. There's this very like broad set of incentives in like one large monolithic DAO, and like, are those incentives sufficiently aligned to get stuff done? I think are all really good questions to ask. It's funny because there's kind of like this philosophical divide, like in crypto and even in the DAO community, of people who are like, yes, these are our problems. We should solve them with less tokens, or we should solve them with more tokens. Like, you see both of those takes on the timeline. Chase is kind of like, well, the only way out is through more tokens, right? Which I think is like, yeah, oh, there's David right underneath replying, or no tokens at all. With his take. I think, I think it's like super interesting conversation to have. One thing I've observed is like, the one thing that's good about having like one token is that it is more simple. Like, one of the things that is really damaging for DAOs is when you have like a bunch of different parts that no one fully understands. And then it's kind of like very confusing for people to understand how the DAO works and figure out how to get involved, right? So just like adding any complexity at all to a DAO is extremely dangerous in terms of just like fracturing the attention and like the basically social scalability. Like, people talk about this with Bitcoin, right? Like, why is Bitcoin still like the largest market cap token when it's like, has no utility, right? And it's like, one reason for this is it's just like very, very simple. Bitcoin people call this social scalability, right? So like, nothing happens. It's kind of like the concern Chase is highlighting here. Like, no one ever does anything in Bitcoin. So it's like, that's bad, but it's also good because like everyone understands how Bitcoin works and can easily like just get involved by like supporting it. Right. And there's like one token and one way it works, and it does one thing. Right. So that's another trade-off maybe to highlight, is sort of like this operational complexity versus social scalability. And so, I think that's like one thing to keep in mind with the idea of like splitting up the DAO into multiple tokens, is like, it could make it a lot more difficult for people to understand what the DAO is and how it works.
Yeah, I think she mentions it too. Like, it might be a total mess, or it could create more opportunity for stakeholders to participate in specialized governance. I think like it's an interesting thought experiment. But yeah, like, I don't know. It seems more like, I mean, and the caveat is like, it's probably only going to work for certain types of DAOs, particularly DAOs as consumer products. But I don't know. It's interesting. I think there's no way. I think it's possible it could work. I think more likely it's going to be a shit show just based off like human nature and what we've seen so far. But I think there's not going to be one specific way to do it going forward, especially as we onboard a bunch more people. And I think the David Phelps and the Chase Chapman, like, all differing perspectives are good. And then you have the middle ground, where it's Daniel, who I think we've talked about before on DAO Talk, what he says. We have a model a bit like you described, no tokens, but still a ledger of accounting for multiple semi-autonomous units. It would be tokens, but legal complexities abound, and the tech to manage them is clunky still, which is kind of what you mentioned, like way, way, way too much complexity. And the tech's not built for that yet, and maybe never will be or needs to be. So I think there's ways to find a middle ground between solving the problem she's talking about without issuing a ton of new tokens. So interesting. All right, last thought take from yours truly. I had a little hypothesis this week. Something I've talked about, I think, on some podcast interviews we've done with like Juice Cast and then with the Rehash is like thinking about every time I talk about like my origin story of like college. So my hypothesis is 90% of the people I went to college with prefer work streams more similar to DAOs than traditional orgs. It's a spectrum, and this generation is actively value aligning towards autonomous internet-enabled careers. My thought process on this is just like, I think from like my perspective, and I'm doing some validation. I'm like reaching out to people who I went to college with that are working in like Big Four consulting and traditional corporations and finance, and kind of figuring out like, do you love the way you work or your work is set up? Take money out of it. And I think Aaron responded talking about like, okay, what about getting paid? And this take, I'm kind of assuming, you know, the financial needs of the labor force are met regardless of whatever type of work they're doing. I think if that's held constant, which obviously cannot be ignored, but for this take, just assume it's held constant. I think the majority of people I went to college with would prefer to work the way DAO contributors work, or the way, you know, that hybrid work model works, where it's more autonomous, it's more focused on the individual showing up, being a self-starter, having autonomy, which puts a lot more emphasis on the hiring process. Like, not the majority of people aren't like this, which is why like in the tweets lower down, it's like the data might be anecdotal and biased because it was at a large university and a established business school, so it's a very particular type of person. But I think even if you silo it to those type of people, I think that's still a large labor force that can be unlocked and be brought into the space with a lot of really cool ideas and energy. Yeah, it's kind of like an open-ended take. I don't know what you think, Frisson. Do you see like a lot? I know you're a little bit older than me, but like, do you see that playing out in like colleagues you talk to that are outside of the space? Like, how do they view the way you work and the way DAOs work, or do they not even understand it?
This model that you're describing, which is kind of like the DAO working model, which is kind of like entrepreneurial and multi-threaded, is actually how most people in the world work. So the model, the quote unquote traditional model of employment as it relates to like, I guess America or something like that, the US, the United States or something like this, is where you sort of like, they got scaled up in the 1950s, you know, like with like IBM or like government jobs where people like have a salary and a 9 to 5 and work there for 30 years and they have a pension or whatever. I think it has created a lot of value in society, but it's actually, if you were just to count up sort of like the people in the world and then has the denominator and the numerator as the number of people that get income that way, it's actually very small. like I don't know, it's probably less than 10%, maybe, you know. And so I actually think that the way of working that is enabled by DAOs is actually more natural, and like fluid and adaptive to like a dynamic economy. Right. So I think that's my take on this is like, I think the way of working, of being a DAO contributor is actually like more Lindy and more natural than I guess like what is somehow considered a traditional way of working now. So I think our job as DAO proponents is to make this way of DAO working in DAOs more attractive. And the reality, as everyone knows, who's ever worked for a DAO, is that it has a lot of pain points and trade-offs as well. And so we need to figure out how we can continue to make being a DAO contributor like a more attractive value proposition. But I think fundamentally, like this way of working is like Lindy and more natural for like humans in a lot of ways.
Hop into that thread if you have any takes on that or you want to talk a little bit more about it. I'll link it in the show notes as well. Wrapping things up, we got some big news from the Tally side. So if you've heard us mention CHG, Cool Horse Girl, she goes by many names. our newsletter writer, we have some good news. She will be joining Tally full time starting next week. If you're listening to this on Friday, it'll be 3 days from now. So potentially she'll be joining the Dow Talk Boys as a third member of the Dow Talk Weekly podcast. Keep an eye out for that. Even if she doesn't join every week, she'll be a more, what's the word? Even if she doesn't join every week, she will be appearing more on the podcast and in Tally content throughout the week. Super excited about that. If you're watching on YouTube, there's a picture, or if you're not watching, there's a picture, a screen grab of me that Frisson took on a Google Meet when he told me that she had accepted her offer. So we're really excited about that. We are also looking for backend engineers right now to join the Tally team, particularly API engineers. So if you think you are a good fit or know someone who is, let us know. Go apply at careers.tally.xyz. I'll link that in the notes below. That is America's time zone only, but exciting that we're adding people to the team. Frisson, I'll see you next week back in the home state of Utah, the great state of Utah, America's gem. I hope you enjoy the rest of your time in New York. As always, it's an honor. Any closing thoughts besides peace?
Shout out to CHG. We're about to take this thing to the next level. You know, we've just been out here on the grind creating DAO content. We truly created like an astonishing level of DAO content. Like you could definitely train an LLM just on the content that Tommy and I have either created or Content Guild has created in the last year. But like we haven't actually done any work on distribution, right? Like how can we take this thing to the next level? We've shown we can ship, but it's time to scale. So CHG is going to be the key to unlocking that. The dream team is expanded, you know. First it was 2, now it's 3. Let's go.
You heard it here first. It's time to scale. Frisson, it's been an honor. Peace.
Peace.